Thank you to all for coming, for those who are here in person and those who are joining us online. This is another one of those sessions that I've been really looking forward to. My 12-year-old granddaughter is using Duolingo to learn language, and I'm still not quite sure that that's enough of a foundation to get her where I hope she will be someday. And so I'm keen to see what you as specialists in foreign language learning and talk about AI and all of that that's ahead of us. Well, Amy Clay, you're the director of Basic Language Program in French and a teaching associate professor of French. You oversee the French language program, you teach courses on teaching methodology, cultural studies, and French language. And you have in fact been integrating AI literacy into your French language program over this academic year. And so you're looking forward to sharing more about your insights, maybe preliminary insights, and we're really keen on hearing what you have to say. So Charlie Webster, you are the director of the Basic Language Program and director of undergraduate studies in the Department of Germanic Languages and Literatures. So you do program supervision and undergraduate advising, but you also teach advanced language, linguistics, and teaching methodology courses. By the way, when I looked at your profile, it's like, how can you be involved in so many courses? Do you hold the record of courses that you're involved in, of any faculty on campus? Wow. And your research and teaching interests include language learning during study abroad. As former study abroad dean, that's something I really embrace, but also migration, linguistic diversity, and multilingualism, especially in Europe. It's great here to be joined by Kostas. We'll all be listening to the presentation, and then you'll help manage the panel discussions. We've also prepared some questions, but we also hope to have many questions from the audience in the room and online. You're the director of operations at CITL, and in fact, you learned English and French long before AI entered the classroom. And you studied in this very building, French and Italian. There's going to be a test afterwards. We haven't told him this yet, right? But we have prepared a little exam for you at 3 o'clock. And you have a professional and personal interest in what AI literacy means in the context of language learning. So I think that's an interest we all share. And with that, I'd like to hand over to you.
Thank you, Andrea. Yeah, our panelists have prepared a PowerPoint, right, a set of slides, and I'll pass the mic to you.
Okay. So just quickly, what we're going to do is talk about AI literacy, kind of give a quick overview. Then we'll talk about specifically in language teaching and learning. And then we'll have a lot of time for question and answer session at the end. All right. So those of you in the room, you can raise your hand. Those of you online, you can use the thumbs up button to let us know which of these statements do you identify with. Yes, raise your hand. When you think about GenAI as a teacher. I'm very familiar with AI tools. How about, I'm optimistic for the future of generative AI in education. I'm here with you. Where are you?
You have to be okay.
Do we I'm optimistic, and sometimes, some days, right? Let's see. I'm concerned about security risks involved with generative AI. Yeah, there's a lot of security risks that we don't realize that can be integrated through teaching and using GenAI in teaching. I wonder about the ethics of using GenAI chatbots and other tools. Yeah. How about, I'm afraid that I won't have a job anymore because GenAI might replace me. You go for it if you're like kind of maybe a little, yeah. We recognize our role, right? That the instructors have an essential role in teaching, even when the technology is integrated. I love seeing that. My students are using GenAI in ways that hurt their learning in my class. So my students are using generative AI in ways that prevent or harm their learning a little. Some students or some harm, maybe. How about my students are using GenAI tools in ways that I consider cheating in my classes. I'm excited to see how AI will change education and learning. I'm like nervous and excited, the nervous kind of excited personally. How about you? Same. Yeah. I'm worried about how AI will change education and learning. I think this one, yeah, I am. We're kind of mixed in the room. How's online looking?
We have
Not
one
many.
comment.
So we have a strong comment here. I believe we can handle AI's influences, whatever they may appear to be. Strong
Confident?
confidence.
Strong confidence. All right. So we have quite a wide range, I would say. There are a few things, like we're all excited, a little bit, maybe nervous or concerned that things could go the wrong way if we don't stay in control at the wheel as educators. So we're going to talk about AI literacy from an educator perspective and thinking about language learners in particular. I can hand it off to Charlie for a second.
Okay. So let me just also state that I think we've worked with AI and we're kind of experimenting and we've done a lot of things, but I don't know that we would consider ourselves experts, right? And I think no one is really in this space kind of an expert yet. We're all kind of experimenting, and you all have different experiences, and we'd like to hear your experiences. So we're going to share some of the experiences we've had and some of the lessons that we've learned from working with AI for both a teacher and learner perspective, and also as program directors. But we're excited to have a discussion with you afterwards about how you are using AI. And so I don't know in the audience who is, some of you are maybe very familiar with AI tools, some of you haven't used them, are just sort of learning. So we have a kind of a mixed audience here. So some of this might be a little bit of a review for you if you've been using these AI tools. But so things to keep in mind for language teaching. They're pre-trained, so they don't really know anything, right? They're sort of generating information based on information that it's been fed in the past, right? And so it's important to know kind of where that information is coming from. Not all languages are equally represented, so if you teach a less commonly taught language, there might not be as many tools available to you. And if you teach a language that has multiple national varieties or dialects, right, those might not actually be equally represented, which I think is an important thing to keep in mind, right? The tools have, oops.
It will come back.
Come back, okay. Yeah, the tools have no moral compass, right? So sometimes you might get an output that you think is morally objectionable, right? But you need to kind of think about, right? It may act very much like a human being, but it is not a human being, right? And like I said, the output doesn't always represent a diversity of ideas or heterogeneity in language, right? There is sometimes a lot of what is represented is sometimes a very standard language ideology and also lacks linguistic diversity. These are the kind of the four leading generative AI tools. You might all be very familiar with this, but I'm putting this up because some people say, well, ChatGPT, and ChatGPT is not the only tool, right? So if you tell your students don't use ChatGPT, well, they can use something else, right? ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, Claude, those are sort of the four kind of leading generative AI tools. But there are other ones, obviously, and a lot of different tools that incorporate these other generative AI into the tool itself. There's a training from CITL on Canvas that kind of goes through these different AI tools, so which ones are good for what purpose. Okay. So let's come on to AI literacy. So that's what kind of our main focus today. What is AI literacy?
So AI literacy, there's a lot of different models and frameworks for understanding AI literacy. I really like the model from Stanford Teaching Commons here, functional, ethical, rhetorical, and pedagogical literacy. And in this, the idea is, how does AI work? How do we navigate the ethical issues of AI? How do we use language to achieve our goals? Rhetorical. and pedagogical. How do we use AI to enhance teaching and learning? I think in addition to this model, Low 2025 here brings out the technical elements as well. So technical skills, I think that's kind of missing. Inside of critical thinking as well, we might want to add in epistemological questions, like what does it mean to know? Does AI know things? Who is doing the act of like understanding and knowing when we use AI as a tool to support us in writing or idea generating? What are the sources of information that we glean from AI? I'm thinking through like this. I think these kind of epistemological questions still fit into critical thinking, but I want to bring them up and add them in. Societal impact. How does the use of generative AI change society? I think we're seeing it happen around us, but we need to have an awareness of this as teachers. Excuse me. So, sorry, I can't read my notes because the computer's too far away. I finally pushed the age where I can't see anymore. And so what I really want to say here is that the educator's responsibility, from my perspective, is that we have to be AI literate because we need to teach students how to think critically about how they use it as learners. And I think that applies to all technology, but especially a technology that can seemingly replace thinking in some spaces. So let's talk about some of the components now of what AI literacy can look like within classrooms and for different people. You first.
Okay. So one aspect of being AI literate is actually knowing how to use it, right? How to use it effectively, and what kind of output you're going to get based on the prompt that you give the AI. Okay. So this is called prompt engineering. This is right. So creating a prompt that that leads the AI to give you output that you that you actually want, right? So it's important to remember the role that the AI plays here, giving it enough context, giving it specific details, and a specific objective, right? So you might not get the result that you want the first time. You might have to kind of engineer. And I think students are also kind of learning how to prompt engineer, right? But you also have to think about how do we interpret the input, right? This is important for students and teachers. The input that comes out, right, might not be accurate, okay? And this is very important. I mean, I've given in an AI tool sentences that were both grammatical and ungrammatical, and said fix the grammar, and then because the AI tool is sort of wants to produce something helpful, it actually corrected some of the grammatical sentences to make them ungrammatical, and said here now everything is now the grammar's fixed, right? So and that's important. I think I've seen students, for some reason, rather than using a grammar handbook or their textbook, will ask questions, right? Can you explain why the verb goes here, right? And that explanation might actually be correct, right? And that's important to know to tell our students, right? But also when we're generating content, right? So how do we interpret the output? It's important to actually interpret the output, not just copy and paste the output and think that it's 100% accurate. And there's the kind of hallucinations to watch out for. So creating information things that do not exist, right? Creating information from nothing. There are also a number of ethical and security considerations, and these are things that we have to balance as users of AI, and think about who owns the data, what is the data being used for, what kinds of data are you putting into the AI. So think about privacy policies. Think about if you're putting any personal information or FERPA protected information, do you really want to put that into into the generative AI tool, where is that data going? Okay, think about bias. Again, there are lots of different biases depending on the information that it has been fed and what it produces. There, be careful for bias. Think about copyright. So, who owns this? Who has the copyright on this information that is produced? Also, workers' rights and inequities, environmental and climate concerns. So there has been a lot of discussion about the energy and water and things that data centers use, right? So this is, I think, a legitimate concern, but it's a concern we all have to balance, have to think ethically in our lives, right? And the kind of clothes we buy, the transportation we use, the businesses we choose to shop at, right? These are all sort of ethical considerations, right? So these are personal considerations that you have to take into account, right? So we're not going to say don't use AI because of this or use AI because of this. These are things that you have to investigate for yourself, right? But you may encounter students who might have ethical concerns about using AI also, and then so how do you address those concerns? So I think it's important to think, that this is a discussion that's going on, right? And I mentioned this before about the language ideologies, right? Is what is being produced, does this reinforce a standard language ideology, not showing diversity in language, right? Because that a lot of the texts that the AI has are written texts, right? They may not show dialect variation or from underrepresented groups who are users of that language. So that's also something to keep in mind. Okay. All right, Amy.
Okay, so when I'm thinking about AI literacy in my classes, we could kind of think of these as learning outcomes. So I want students to be able to answer questions for themselves, like when does my using AI help me learn in this class, and when does it slow my language learning? So if I use AI to do this task, does it actually help me accomplish my learning goals in class? Ideally, those learning goals are aligned with my learning goals for them in this situation. What kinds of biases could using generative AI introduce into my work or thinking? Can it help me identify my own biases? So this is not something we talk a lot about, how it introduces bias, but not if we can use it to interrogate bias, right? How does GenAI, using GenAI to do a part of my work, change what I think, how I know, what I see? As soon as I generate something with AI, I can't unknow or unsee it. And so I need to make a conscious decision before so that I can decide or think for myself too. We talk a lot about using AI, for example, for brainstorming. And in some classes I say, hey, I don't think you should do that actually. And not before you start to think for yourself, right? Because as soon as you see those ideas, it might be hard to come up with your own ideas to add to the list. Now, can I take my list and ask for holes in it or things I didn't think about? Maybe, yes. But if I start only with that, it might stop me from being able to take the next step or add something that I, like with my human brain, can bring to knowing and understanding, right? What might I miss if I use automated translation to engage with a text in another language? I will, actually let me tell you about the kinds of things I do in class, and this is gonna come up as one of them. All right, so I will say in my language classes, I don't work on technical skills. I don't do prompting as a teaching tool. I think it's a good idea though, and I wanna think about it. I think I need to think about like how would that fit. But what I do are these other skills, practical skills, critical awareness, ethical thinking, societal impact. My students in French 103, they read a text from an author who is Black Guadeloupean French. And this text is written talking about a cafe in Paris. It's Mary's Condé. And it's talking about an experience at a cafe in Paris, okay? And I asked my students to take this text where this author, who is black, Guadeloupean, is in 1940s France, in Paris, in a cafe, and to use AI to generate an image. What do you think they get? A bunch of white people in a cafe with era-appropriate attire. I want to speak French all of a sudden now, tenue. But they don't get the subtext, right? They don't get that the text is talking about racism in the cafe, because that picture that they generate from it comes from a system that sees France as a white place, right? So it introduces bias. What am I doing then? I'm helping them gain ethical and critical awareness about what happens when I use generative AI to create images from text, and how might it introduce even bias into my own understanding. Like, it might lead to me thinking France is a white place. It's not, right? It's a very multicultural place. I have students in our 4th semester class. But when we talk about technology, actually in this class, the students, they make a vocabulary list that is about, I think it's a GenAI vocabulary list in French using AI, and then they decide what's missing from their list, right? And what tools or words they might use that the machine didn't offer. So they're thinking about, how can this tool help me to identify vocabulary around a topic so I can study with it, right? But also, how can I take what it does and adapt it to what I need as well? So there's always that human interaction, the human loop back in. Also in our 4th semester class, we do reflective comparisons of summaries of text, right? So I summarize a text on my own, and then I summarize a text using GenAI, and I decide, did I learn something new from doing it with AI? Do I agree with it? And the goal here is not to teach students how to summarize, but it really is to start to build these little pieces of critical awareness of the way that generative AI functions, so that students, when they're studying, when they're speaking a language, when they're encountering a text outside of my class, they have skills and a reflective habit with AI, right? That goes under these literacy headings. Let me tell you some more. In all classes that I teach, I always talk about what do you use AI for? What are you using AI for in this class? When students say, for example, I use it to study, I ask it to explain grammatical concepts to me. I say, oh, that's a really good idea. You have to click the links to the original source that it used, because it may not actually be accurate. Maybe there will be a time when it always is, right? But right now it's not. And so going back to the source, you've got to check that information. That's one where you're not a specialist enough in the language, and so relying on that might actually hurt you, right? Other things are students saying things like, oh, I use it to ask me questions. And this is great. Like, everybody else should be doing this. Let's learn from each other in the classroom, right? So I always have these discussions open. Some of you who are here may be sad to hear, but in English, so that we can fully understand each other when we talk about this piece. So that students, when they're in my class, they know what I expect from them and how it intersects with the learning goals in our class, right? I have policies also, I think, that we have in-class writing now. It's been a while, but we brought some in-class writing back. So I expected students to hate it. I want to say this to you. I expected students to be like, I don't want to write in class, this is terrible. I've done it in the language program. I've also done it at in 200 level intro to the major classes. And the funny thing is, students find it a little relieving to not have to write with no support at home. If you don't treat it like a test, I always say it's not a test, but it is proctored, right? So we can talk to each other, you can chat with your neighbor. You can have extra time if you need it. You could come back to my office. No rules like that. But I want to see what you can do on your own. And this, in a language class, is really important because part of what we're trying to do is build skills in the language that you have to do independently. You can't always have an electronic tool to replace, I don't know, your speaking. If I were here with an electronic tool, it would be mediated through something else, right? And it would change our interaction. What else do I do? Policies. My policy in our classes is that you can't use GenAI before you submit something, because I need to know what you could do on your own so that I can give you feedback. Now, my homework, it's easy to get an A on, right? You get multiple attempts and things like that. So it's not about getting it right the first time, but you can use it after to study or review. Now, how do students interact with this? Some go with this, some don't, right? We have lots of academic integrity questions, I think, with AI that come up. But what I'm trying to do is really help my students build literacy in my class about how using generative AI intersects with their learning in that specific environment, right? In addition to being a teacher of language, I'm also a program director, right? I coordinate several classes. And I think that this AI literacy, I added some notes here, right, is technical knowledge, like things that we need to have. Like knowing what security risks we might introduce, practical skills, critical awareness. So we need to integrate our pedagogical skills in. When we're using AI tools, we have an expertise that, when it intersects with AI, can lead to really great things. But when we don't put our own pedagogical knowledge and skills in, it can lead to really terrible, messy things. Ethical thinking. So what do we do with copyrighted? This is, I think, a big question. Like, how do we handle copyrighted materials when we're interacting with generative AI? Societal impact. And what I want to say here is colonial discriminatory input gets colonial discriminatory output, right? And there are a lot of biases within the system and within the language that the language models have access to, and so that will get reified in the system. So as a program director, though, I am using AI to help me with some program direction things I'm going to tell you about. One is I'm not using it to access anything. I'm using it to help me learn how to do things, right? I have processes that have lots of steps, and I have to hold in my head that I need to remember to follow up if someone doesn't email me back at any given step. I have no idea how to use Power Automate, right? And I am learning, and I asked Claude, which I chose for ethical reasons, I will tell you, to help me create a for dummies way to automate a system. I said, asked it to ask me a bunch of questions to understand all the steps in the system and what I need and the tools that I have access to. And it's so hard to use Power Automate, let me tell you. But now I have a form that when I enter all the information into it, it will auto-populate a Word document and auto-send it out for me. And I haven't finished yet, but my next steps are to add automated reminders and things like that, which I'm very excited about, as you can tell. I also, so Tamper Monkey is from my not tech background, is an extension, but I use it in Chrome as a Chrome extension that can run script over a page, right? Tech people in the room, is this good enough? Yeah. And so one of the things on campus that we're working on is accessibility, and one of the requests for language is to tag language changes in the HTML. And I have to say, I got the idea from Dan
Davis.
Davis,
Yeah.
thank you, from Atlas. But the tool, he created a tool a little while back, but it was breaking at different times because of some functionality with Canvas. I asked Claude to make a HTML language tagger. It didn't work perfectly the first time, but I understood why it wasn't working. With little tiny tweaks. It took a few versions of it, but now I could show you if you want. At HTML, I'm going to show you two things. So this is Tamper Monkey, and this is my language tagger script. Let me show it to you. I did not obviously write this because I would not be able to. And then, oh shoot, I meant to open a Canvas page. We'll see, I might be able to open it, I might not. Yes. Let me grab a template. And then that, script is running. I'm going to edit the page. It's running down in this corner. And when I open this, you can see it says wrap as French, apply language tags for French or English, and apply all content. So I can set a page so that if a screen reader reads it, it knows that it's in French. And then I can tag sections of it in English or vice versa. And it works in Canvas and WordPress because I have a textbook that I wrote in WordPress. Do you have a question?
Is this for accessibility purposes?
Yeah. Yeah. I could never do this on my own, right? And so I need some technical skills. I need to understand a little bit about HTML. I need to know what I need to do with the tagging. But it's so much faster. Now let me tell you about the security thing, though, right? And the copyright thing. So Claude proposed to me. I'm going to anthropomorphize Claude. Did I want to automate this so that an AI tool could auto-tag the page? And it would cost me a little money, less than $1 probably, which is fine. I was okay with that. But it has to allow access to the materials on the page to the LLM, right? This is the literacy part. I need to know that that's happening in this process. I decided not to, even though it would save me a bunch of time, because I am not sure yet how I see copyright with my teaching materials. And I know that it's running on top of Canvas, right? And I'm not tech literate enough to be sure when I read through the code that it can't see anything else. So I'm okay with running code that I know can't break anything, but not giving a tool access to the information.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
You're not handing over control.
All right. I have another tool if you want. In just a sec. Hang on. Where's my Canvas page? Let me just refresh. I made a color changer. And so I can now change the color. You can also use it to do some fun stuff if you wish to change the color. I tried to get it to make one that would be accessible, but it's not really very good at it yet. I would need to play around with it some. But I want to show you that. And then the other thing that I've been playing around with, this is my Claude. Oh, it'll come back. I have an adapter issue. There we go. Is I asked Claude to help me make a French language learning game. And this is the output of it, right? And I want to tell you two things. One is, so we have, hang on. Here, I'll show you it here. I put it on a website too. It's what Claude offered me was Le Grand Prix. And it offered me to think about bicycles because bicycles are popular in France. When I asked it to do something about French, where did it say? France, automatically, right? Even though there are French speakers around the world, and there are more French speakers in Africa than in France, right? And so I want to point that out. I'll show you. It has places in Paris, which I edited slightly, and a little game to play with some verbs down here. Students can get hints. I asked it to add this because I thought it needed a hinting tool. should they? And I also asked it to add grammar tips.
Oh, nice.
Right? So what I'll say though is I did this in, maybe 10 minutes, right? With some short back and forth prompting. It's not pedagogically great, right? It's really drill and kill right now. But with my pedagogical expertise and a few more exchanges, this could actually be quite a fun tool and opportunity, but I would need to use my societal literacy, like how can I address how it relies on France as a concept, my pedagogical knowledge to bring in with a tool like this. I won't say anything about RAG tools. We could talk about them later.
Okay. Yeah, so from a teaching perspective, I wanted to comment on how we build assignments that are maybe AI resistant, right? If we say that we don't want students using AI, and then they're going to do it anyway, right? How do we build assignments that minimize the need for AI or integrate AI in a meaningful way, right? Rather than they're using it in a way that we don't want them to. So pen and paper, as Amy said. I'm also doing some pen and paper essays in my 5th semester conversation and writing course, where students just have to write for an hour. It actually saves them time because, I think students sometimes they wait until the last minute to just write something, right? And they're desperate and they put something into a chat bot or Google Translate or something like that. It actually saves them time because they're taking 50 minutes in class to just write. And I tell them actually just write as much as you can. You don't have a dictionary, right? You don't have anything actually. You can just write basically what you have. Then you have the opportunity to meet with me, so I have writing conferences, and then they can hand in their final draft, right? But I just want to see what they can do on their own. So pen and paper, in-class monitoring, so you can maybe have them do some things in class, but you're monitoring whether they're what technology they're using. If you teach an online course, maybe have online proctoring tools so that students aren't able. So they're giving maybe a timed essay or something like that, and they're not able to use AI tools. Assignments referencing or reflecting directly on course materials. So they need to sort of reference what was done in the lecture or what was done in class, what was said in class, right? So they can't maybe get that. Like they're not going to get that from a generative AI. Assignments that emphasize originality and critical thinking. Right, you want to really see the student's perspective on something, right? Not what a generative AI can produce, right? Also personalization, right? Something that's very personal to them that they can write about from their own perspective. Think about process-based assignments. Remember especially in writing, right? The writing is not, the end product is not the point necessarily, right? It's the process. It's about the learning about writing. So don't emphasize so much the final version because that's very tempting for students they want to produce something absolutely perfect, right? And I think it's really important for you to discuss ethical uses and best practices in your classes with students. Don't just, and like Amy was saying, ask your students, what are you using AI for? But I think it's not feasible to just say don't use AI because AI is everywhere. It's in a lot of different tools, right? So if you say don't use AI and then they use AI anyway, what are the repercussions, right? So I think it's really good to address these best practices and ethical uses of AI up front in your classes. As teachers, we can also use AI for assessment, and this is a decision you'd have to make as a teacher, right? If you want to use AI for item generation to create a quiz or something, if you give it a text and say, make 10 comprehension questions based on this text. Assistive writing tools, this is sort of like a grammar checker. If you feel like, instead of reading all of the essays, you put, the essays into an AI and then say, tag all of the instances of this verb being wrong or something like that. No, there are ethical considerations, right? So you might not want to do that as a teacher, but these are things that are possible. Also, automated in scoring and feedback. If you notice, if this is something that's in German, adjective endings are always a really big thing that students struggle with, right? So if I have an automated feedback, I feed all of their information into the AI, and then it says, work on your adjective endings, and these adjective endings are, rather than I have to circle every single adjective ending that's wrong, right? That is something that you could do with an AI tool. I just wanted to mention a few advanced tools. We won't go into this, but Gliglish is a chatbot that students can type and then also converse with. I think it's not as good as speaking to someone in person, but it actually works fairly well for some kind of practice with speaking. Diffid also, this is great for generating text, generating authentic materials, generating comprehension questions, true and false questions, mind maps, flow charts, all kinds of different things. TurboScribe, this is really important also for accessibility. In language teaching, we always want to use authentic materials, but sometimes using authentic materials is very difficult because you have to sort of didacticize everything. You have to, if you're using videos, you have to make subtitles and things, and so this can be a very time-consuming process. TurboScribe actually creates subtitles for videos, video and audio files, so this is actually can be a big time saver and also for accessibility reasons. Natural Reader and Narrakeet are two tools that read text, and so students can kind of hear a written text aloud. I know. So Natural Reader has some diversity in German voices. I think Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. I don't know about Narrakeet. You said that. Oh, sorry, Amy. You said that it only has like French from France and not other accents represented.
It has several accents, but they're all European.
Okay.
Or North American.
Yeah, so that's something to consider. Also, kind of what accents are students hearing. So yeah, those are a few advanced tools that you can explore. But I think we've kind of come to the end of our presentation, and we're really interested in hearing your questions and kind of having a discussion with you about this because we're all experimenting with AI. We all have different experiences, so we'd really like to hear what your experiences are. Sure.
Thank you to Amy and Charlie for the great insights. You shared a lot of benevolent uses of AI, high order uses, and you prompted us to think in high order ways and also provided very practical ways to incorporate it in your teaching and to enhance teaching. And before we pass the baton to the audience for questions, Amy, Charlie shared before the presentation, allow me to share that, Amy, that something about languages not being languages are culturally embedded, but AI doesn't have culture.
Oh, yeah.
And the example you shared, right, shows us precisely that, right? Mm-hmm. The image creation from text, that it's lacking a lot of context, a lot of culture. So, thank you. It's time for the audience, both physically and online.
Maybe to get started, we do have one excellent question online. So Aristeo Perez asked, as students increasingly use AI before arriving at college, have you noticed any shifts in their foundational academic skills? And compared to last year, do this year's freshmen seem better or worse at using AI properly?
I don't know if I have a good answer.
I don't know if I think it's a little bit too early to tell. I don't know that I've noticed. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think I have noticed a sort of change in the new generations of students coming through, and I think this is a lot of actually trauma still from the pandemic, and I think this is actually still palpable, and had an impact on how students study, how they learn, and I think generative AI is just a piece of that, right? So they don't know how to study on their own, or they are increasingly looking to use technology. but maybe don't use technology in the best way that's beneficial for their learning. I would say. But.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me too. Thinking because our freshmen, they were in junior high, which is an essential place where you start to get study skills, I think, and independent learning. And so I definitely noticed that. I'm not sure as well if it's a technology question or just a general cultural question, though. It's, I do think it's something that we have to engage with, though, as teachers. And part of that, the piece that I think relates back to AI literacy and pedagogical literacy too, is that when we have an understanding of how students learn and what would help them to learn better in the environments that we have, I think it is essential that we share that with them, right? And so if we're in a situation where it seems like the way that our students are studying isn't working, it doesn't matter if it's AI, right? It is, here are ways that will help you study effectively in a way that is efficient with your time and will get you what you need. And that might incorporate technology, but it might not.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions from the online audience. How about people in the room? Maria?
I just want to say thank you for sharing your experience. These are sensitive issues, and this is the first time we're hearing people teaching how they're using AI. I don't know if I'm old-fashioned. Maybe I should share my little tip. I ask my students to have a notebook and make use of the notebook and write things down and write things repeatedly. And I just feel a little like, saying that, but I don't know what you think about that as well, especially now with the AI.
In every class that I teach, I tell my students that there is research-backed, there's evidence that writing helps you learn and remember and recall things. And so even handwriting specifically, not typing. You might think I'm old-fashioned too. I don't allow laptops in my classroom. For exactly this reason, I ask them to bring a notebook and to take notes during class, and I tell them why.
So I was sensitive to the fact that you mentioned outcome, reflecting on AI being part of the outcomes of learning goals, right? Like learning outcomes, learning goals. So I just finished an online course by EDUCAUSE on teaching with AI. And one of the last sessions, I think maybe it was the last one, but this came up. And I remember I was categorical saying, I'm not teaching about or with or on AI. I have a subject matter that I have to cover. So the meta knowledge of how AI helped you it's not something I need to cover. But I changed my attitude a little bit today because it is true that in terms, as a language learner, just with the examples that you said, maybe that stance has to be relaxed a little bit because you do have to be able to reflect how your use of AI is enhancing this pronunciation training or this writing training or not. Because the object of your learning is the language, where it's not like politics of language. You know, like it's like, So I was wondering, how have you seen, because you argued this side that I forgot about, but have the two of you seen this other side when you are sort of topic focused and other than having good sound assignments where you pencil and paper and all that, you do not reflect on AI because that you're covering a topic, like a subject matter.
I would say, one of the things that we also try to teach our students is metalinguistic skills, right, that are important for learning the language, but it's not these skills that you're touching about the topic, but along the way you have to develop these skills, right? And I think interpreting output from an AI is part of metalinguistic knowledge, actually evaluating something, if what the output, if it is actually what level it is at, and sometimes that's difficult, especially for lower level learners. But I think it's on the same order of teaching students, if you're going to use Google Translate, this is the way to do it, or this is how you use the paper dictionary, right? So I think it's a skill that I don't think we have to be experts about it, but I think if students are going to be using it anyway, we can't ignore that it occurs, and I think we have to sort of cultivate that knowledge, which I think fits into metalinguistic knowledge also.
I think too, Susanna, I think you're talking too about courses that aren't focused on language as a skill, but a content area. It's something that I think really early in thinking about, because I've spent much of my time focused on what's happening in my language program and what do I do, right? And so I have had conversations. I'm teaching an intercultural competence class right now, and I've had conversations with my students about when they're using it and what could it offer for them. I haven't integrated specific activities yet. I did integrate policy though, and it wasn't to ban AI. I integrated policy that is part of our writing happens in class and part happens at home. And on the parts that happen at home, you have to document your process. And even short writing, you document your process. And I gave examples of what those documentations could look like. And it could be, I wrote this in Google Docs from my notes, and I accepted all of the grammatical changes, and that's it. It could be, I asked AI to check it against the rubric, and then edited it afterwards and submitted the final version, but they have to submit their original and prompt with it, even for short writing. And for me, what that is doing is helping me understand how students are using it. I'm not policing it in this setting. More, I want to know what's happening so that I can make decisions next. Yeah. So I don't know, but.
This is very helpful. Thank you. And then would that be a case of process-based assessment? I don't know if I'm using those technical words correctly here, but so would that be process-based?
I don't think so. I think it. I don't know what I would call it. So what I call it is document your process.
Okay.
Just plain language. I don't know if do you know if there's a...
Well, you're not assessing the process, really. You're assessing
Right.
the final product, but
Yeah.
you just, as a teacher, want to see the process, right? And I think you could do a sort of process-based assessment where you have different stages for maybe a larger writing project and say, this is the first draft, or, and document how you've used AI or not used AI, for example.
Thank you. So we have another online question. Thank you for sharing, very helpful. I am wondering if you engage with students in this angle, what is your strategy to use AI that has had good impact on your learning? And how do you know that the impact is good? So what criteria used to help you decide the impact is good?
Impact on my learning.
Because you ask those kind of questions, right? You're asking about how they're using AI.
Yeah. So we're asking students, when you're using AI to learn, how does it impact you? I think that when I use AI to do things, I'm just naturally a self-questioner, and so naturally reflective, and I think really deeply about the impact of it and look at the output, looking for bias and things like that. And so maybe, I'm not sure if this fully answers the question, but I think about, so I've used Narrakeet, which has a limited number of accents in French, to generate voice recordings, because I needed 1,000 words, individual words voice recorded for my textbook, right? And I know that one of the limitations is that it has American and European French, and it doesn't have, it has no African French varieties or accents represented. And so I worked really hard to make sure that I included all of the possibilities, but I had to also kind of make a choice of what is the trade-off in terms of, if I spend that time on something else that contributes to representation, diversity, and inclusion in my classes instead of trying to find people to record things. It's just more meaningful, right? And so I'm not sure if this fully answers the question, but I think I learn about how the tools function by using them, but I do it as a critical user always. I always come with that standpoint. If when Claude said code this way or power automate that way, I said, well, what about this other thing? To which the Claude always says, yes, that's a great idea too, and then later, because it always affirms, right? That's what I'm learning, is not to accept its affirmations maybe too, and to know that when I push back, it's gonna just assume I like say you're right, not assume I'm right, but say you're right. But so I'm also learning, like, how is the tool functioning with me?
Yeah, I think that's really great. You know, to be literate. We're playing around with different tools with a critical eye, and I think that's really important. The more I use AI tools, I sort of came into it being very optimistic, and now I would say I'm very realistic. Realistic, right? I know the limitations. I know what certain tools can be used for and what they can't do, and I am a critical user too. And I think the more we use that, the more we play around with these tools and kind of and evaluate them, we're going to be better teachers. And I think you can't have your students play around with all different tools, but in a sense you are kind of curating the tools for them, and you know what they can and can't do, and so then you can impart some of what you've learned to your students for them to also be critical users of the tools.
Maybe referring on what you said, you have a lot of experience and expertise to discern if the output is quality or not, right? You said, I could maybe curate the tools, but you're curating against your vast experience, expertise. So our students, not having that experience, how can they evaluate what's good? And how can we forge a path forward for them where they're able to acquire all of that expertise that is sort of non-AI based, or not totally shaped by AI, so that they too are in a position to critically assess the output of anything that's AI generated?
I mean, the truth is we have to have high standards of learning in our classes, period. Like, we need to maintain expectations for students for meeting learning goals in ways that maybe don't always rely on technology. I think we need language classes, we need cultural studies, we need the coding classes so that we have people who can evaluate how it's coding. We need to not allow generative AI to replace learning. And so if we continue to have high standards for our students and not accept subpar work, I think they will gain those skills, because we are good teachers. We do have things to share, and we're in an institution with this level of excellence. So I don't know, that's what I would say.
I think there's a question back there. Yeah.
Hey, I'm Todd. I'm at the College of Ed. I just want to say, you kind of hinted at this idea of having an AI acknowledgement process for students, right? And you spoke of it as it was a way for you to learn. But one of the things that we're seeing, and I'm speaking specifically, I oversee our computer science education programs. And one of those programs is working with current K-12 teachers who are certified to teach something other than computer science. So they're often non-technical folks. They're coming in without a lot of technical background knowledge. And what we found is that, like, having this process where they acknowledge when they're using AI tools, what they're using them for, and how often is this really beautiful kind of metacognitive dance between the instructor and the teacher-student, where we're both learning from this. And one of the outcomes of that, and this kind of goes into that bucket of what kind of assignments are we getting that they're AI-proof. I think the other way of looking at that, what we're finding is that when are folks going to AI tools, right? Because they don't do it all the time. And one of the things that for these teachers who often have families and have other responsibilities and stuff, they're telling us, you know what, I just was overwhelmed. I didn't have enough time. I needed to get into this. but then then they acknowledge, you know, I did use this tool, but also I don't understand it. And so they're beginning to explore their own cognitive offloading that they can then take to their students, right? So again, it's this like really nice conversation that's going around.
Yeah, we're in this sort of tricky spot where we have subject area experts who are using tools. I want to look at you, but I can't see you, sorry. Who are using tools to supplement the thing that they know, but they don't necessarily know the tools. And so I think what I take away from what you said, Todd, is that training for using AI is essential. It's essential for educators, especially in education, for K-12 educators, so that when our students come up through that program, they're prepared to engage with it in a way that's appropriate and helpful in college. For educators on our campus, so that we don't have policies that are like just ban AI in class, because that's not functional. And so having, I think it, but something that you hit at is where's the time, right? And so I don't know the answer to that question though. Like, how do we integrate time for education on how this tool is going to change? Because it's going to change thinking and learning. We're humanists here. It's going to change it. But we need to like be in the room, in the space, and we need to be educated on how it's functioning, so that way we get to make decisions about how we use it.
Thank you, Amy and Charlie. We're at 3 o'clock, a little bit past. Thank you for preparing such an insightful content and engaging with our audience both online and in person. People who wish to stay and engage more can do so. But thank you very much.